Joshua, go lie down.
Is he an old dog?
13 now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, he's in good shape for 13.
Sure is.
So whenever you're ready.
All right. So, in terms of describing your childhood, what events stand out in your memory?
Well, that's awfully hard to say. There are so many events. But I would say that one is the great opportunities that period posed. Always learning new things, always seeing new opportunities, always looking for answers to questions and trying to frame the questions. And the wonderful thing about the American system, that people will help others if you ask and if you're respectful.
Now, where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Southern California. I was born in Alaska, in the interior, in a little mining town on the Yukon River called Ruby, Alaska, about 180 miles west of Fairbanks on the Yukon River. You got there by dog sled, or you got there by horse, or you could get there by boat.
And how old were you when you left there?
About 3.5.
Okay.
And I have a photograph somewhere of leaving, and some that were there. And there was, I had a brother and I had a sister. I was the youngest of the group. I was 3.5, my brother was 7, and my sister was halfway in between. And we were leaving by dog sled in the wintertime. And my brother and my sister were in one dog sled with an Indian guide. I was in the other dog sled with the dog food and the people food. And my mother was mushing that dog sled. And that would have been the distance of 180 miles to on to the east, back in the area where Sarah Butcher, who has won the Iditarod on a number of times, had her farm and kept her dogs. But that was well before she was there.
When was this?
That would have been in 1926, quite some time ago.
And what, I just checked, what made you leave?
Yeah.
What prompted the move?
Well,
Is that okay? Good.
Were your parents Native Alaskans?
No.
No. Okay, so were they up there with the boom?
Okay, you're asking me a question verbally, and that I mean.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Well, you've asked a question about why did my family leave Alaska. It's a complicated story, but it's a very simple story. My mother went to Alaska after her father died. They lived in South Dakota, and she had 2 brothers. And the mother decided to go up to the gold rush, which at that time was out of Nome on the beach in Alaska. And so they moved from South Dakota to Nome, Alaska, and had a boarding home for the miners. My father came in from Alaska. My father came in from Ireland and South Africa, and they had the family had moved from Ireland to South Africa, and they were somewhat siding with the Boers, and of course the Boers lost the war. So the boys left Alaska and came to the United States and left the girls there. My father got into the mining field, and he was involved in ownership of dredges, but he had 3 basic problems. One is he was Irish. I might say one of the problems that he did not have, he was very successful in the mining world, but he was from Ireland. He couldn't drink. And when he drank, he gambled and lost everything 3 times. So my mother said, it's time to get out of here. And they came to the United States.
And they came all the way down to Southern California immediately, or?
Initially went to, there was a family member in Montana and Wyoming, and then came on down to the Berkeley area. And then moved to Los Angeles area. And then my father decided he couldn't stand shall we say, the everyday life of being in a city, and he departed. Left my mother. My mother had to go to work at nights. And my brother and I, at that time, had to go to work to help the family live.
How old were you?
I was about 8, almost 8. My brother would have been 11 and a half at that time. So we'd see our mother on weekends primarily. And her basic instruction was very simple. And that is, there's a God-given purpose for your creation, and you have the God-given obligation to fulfill that purpose. And you do your best you can, and if you succeed, you take other people with you. That's been our guideline all of our life.
Were you close with your brother? Or?
Very close. Oh yes, I was very close. My brother was very close, and my sister was very close. She died at an early age, but that unfortunately happens.
So what job did you take at age 8 or 8 and a half?
Oh, there were many jobs. One I recall so well, starting out selling Liberty magazines, a magazine they had at the time. We sold papers on the corners. We mowed lawns. We worked into all sorts of other different opportunities. We both worked hard. We went our own ways, and we went together on things. When we needed clothes, we'd work in a clothing store. You'd always have something to do that you could work on. We worked in markets, worked in restaurants. We washed dishes. Food was something to stay near. And we were entrepreneurial. We had a bicycle shop, and we built bicycles and sold the bicycles. And during the Christmas season, I can remember doing this when I was 11 or 12. That famous department store, I would build bicycle wheels. And they offered to pay you a salary, and I said, no, I'll take piecework, because I could make more money with piecework. And so I built the bicycles, our bicycle wheels, trued the bicycles, or trued the wheels, I should say.
And how old were you when you were doing
11 or 12.
You knew about what's a better deal than 11 or 12?
Oh, of course. This is what you call street smarts. You learn these things very, very quickly. And you learn, if you have your skills, you use your skills. And with those skills, you command a commensurate price.
Now, did you enjoy any of these jobs in particular, or was it just...
Everything was an opportunity.
Really? Had a positive attitude at all?
You have to. Why shouldn't you? You have to be happy for what you have, not unhappy for what you don't have. But there was opportunity there, and you learn from everything that you did. You ask questions all of the time. You learned more. And you began to obviously learn the financial world, learn the business world, learn the productivity world. And it's an opportunity so many of our children today don't have.
Now, were you also in school while all of this was going on?
I was always in school, even at home. My mother believed that you should learn to read very early, and I did. As did my brother and my sister. And my father, while he was around, was very literary. He was educated at Trinity College in Dublin, and did a great deal of writing, a lot of poetry, and he was a very interesting character.
Did you lose touch with him when he left you all, or where did...
Rarely did I see him. I can remember after he left, maybe a half a dozen times when he'd come and go, and when he came the last time, it was very interesting and very amusing in one way. I hadn't seen him for some period of time. I had my office in the Stock Exchange building on the ground floor in Los Angeles. My secretary came in, and there's some man here that says his name is Kilroy and he wants to see you. And I said, well, I can't do it right now. I'm with someone, and then finished a little later, and he had insisted that he be allowed to see me, and he sent in a piece of paper with poetry on it. And with the writing and the poetry, I realized it was my father. So we spent some time together, and he was living in San Francisco. We had dinner together, and the next day I had to be in San Francisco, so we had a company airplane. I flew him back up to San Francisco in the airplane, and also left a little cash with him. And 2 days later, I received a telephone call from his landlord. And she said, "Mr. Kilroy, some foolish person gave your father some money, and he had a party. And in that party, he fell out of a second-story bay window backwards, and he's now in the hospital and not expected to live." So I dashed back up to San Francisco, went to the hospital, and here he was telling stories, and I think some of them were hallucinating stories. I have to say, it was amusing, it was laughable, and I thought to myself, he's had his own wake. You know, the philosophy of the Irish is you have to be happy for what you've had, not for what you don't have. Well, I was fortunate enough to get my mother to fly up, and she spent a few hours with him, and then he died.
Wow. Wow. That's a great story.
So, who do you think was the biggest influence in your life when you were younger?
My mother. And obviously, my brother was a great influence on my life, as I would have been on his life. Many, many, many people. A junior high school professor, as there were many other teachers. I fortunately had learned to read very early. I think I had read all of Dumas' works by the third grade. But I was able to get through work quickly, and I would ask for more work. I'd already had the privilege of, shall we say, being poor, as so many people did, and I didn't always want to stay that way. So I would get more work, and I would try to get through it promptly and quickly, and then ask questions about what it was about. Because I knew what I knew, but I wanted to know what other people knew. And there's an old theory that I have, is you ask questions in 3 different ways, and see if you get the same answer, or at least you get an adequate box so you can have a more intelligent understanding. My high school coach, great coach, great understanding with so many young men and their problems. And he wasn't just a coach, he ran various other classes on history, and of course history will teach you a lot if you want to read it, want to try to understand it. He was significantly important. So many other people. One of the friends that I met when I was competing in high school, and I think I was either 14 or 15 at the time. I graduated 2 weeks after I turned 17. I guess I was 15, and I was competing in track and competing in basketball, and but I woke up one morning to find that my picture was on the front page of the sports section of the Los Angeles Times. I think I was 15. And he liked what I was doing in that world and the incentive that was there. And you might know his name. He died a few years ago, Paul Zimmerman. Paul was he was a friend for life, and so in that world we talked a lot, and he was a great influence. Various teachers. I had intended to be a college professor in the sciences, but when I found out that they didn't make very much money, I decided I'd already learned to be poor, and I wanted to be in business, and I wanted to create things and do things. My college professors, and I was not an easy student.
Where did you go to college?
Santa Barbara State College, but only for 1 year. I was asked to go to USC and invited to come with various things, but I didn't want a big school. I wanted a small school. I liked Santa Barbara. It was Santa Barbara State College at that time. It was recognized as a very good engineering school. And of course it had its beaches and its beautiful area, so I elected to go to school there.
Can I go back to one thing about,
Sure.
what kind of jobs did your mother have raising your kids?
My mother was the telephone operator at night at the old Los Angeles Daily News. And she also, because there was some added time, was the fashion editor, which it was very amusing. But so that's.
How did she get
Was
to be
it-
fashion editor from switchboard operator?
I think the switchboard operators had a lot of time at night, and she liked it.
Well, what was your first business? What you would now? You told us about making wheels for the store, but what really was your first business?
Well, all growing up at this business side, we worked doing various things, reviewed things. I told you we had our own bicycle shop in a garage that we built bicycles and sold them to other people. We repaired bicycles, but
Maybe post college. What did you?
well, you mean into?
Not sure.
I am commenting on this for a purpose, because you learn the business world as you go along. You learn to have the responsibility of the business world, what it's for, that it's a quite good world, and that you have to plan ahead and you have to have creative ideas, and you suddenly don't get out of school like most people think and suddenly everything appears before you. The real idea is to learn these things as you grow up, and as you do, people will help you and they will teach you, and they will have the experience of being in business to teach you, which is what is so much lacking in the schooling that we have today as young people are growing up. You learn to produce, and you learn to work and associate with others and be motivated, and all of that is a component of business. My business, when I was in college, I worked at restaurants. I did other things in college. We did have an athletic house that was supposed to feed you, but they were bankrupt. One of the great things I had was we had a program at that time during the Depression years, and this was before World War II, called the CYA. It was a California Youth Administration or something like that. And I had the great job of creating tests of other people. In helping to understand other people as well that I knew. Of course, it was all confidential, which included proficiency tests. And it was a wonderful education. And as you go along, all of these events are part of your business education. I always raised a question of why some people who I thought were so quick and so responsive in class, but were quite irresponsive in taking tests. And others who were more on the quiet side were exceedingly good in taking tests. And so you learn how to take tests. You learn how to meet the problems which may be tests in everyday life. So that's all part of business, because where does it begin and where does it end? I was taken out of school after my first year. I was all of 18 and picked to be offered a job at Douglas Aircraft. And I was promised that I would get the best engineering, shall we say, experience that I could possibly have. And I thought myself, an 18-year-old kid, and I had the occasion to meet Don Douglas Sr., and we became better acquainted over a period of time. And they said, you're the kind of kid we like that's willing to look behind the curtain and willing to look for new things. So I was given all sorts of opportunities. That was part of business. And it meant working with other people. And the idea was to create new concepts of looking at things, and in turn to be involved in the shall we say, precision inspection end of various things, which also went to the production end. So here was another teacher. And if I were to talk about Ed Heineman, their chief engineer at El Segundo, became a very good friend. We worked together on many things. And then Lee Atwood, who was president of North American and developed the P-51 and so many other things. Lee and I met in 1941 or 42 when I was over there in connection with intercompany things. And there was this wonderful man. We became acquainted. We talked about many things, asked a lot of questions, and we were friends for life. So it's rather hard to ask a question, and I know it's a simple question, but everything goes together in different components to move in the direction. You're always seeking education, and that education may take you almost anywhere in business.
Well, how did Kilroy Realty evolve into a business?
Well, Kilroy Realty was the last of the activities. It's a public company, a real estate investment trust. And it's today a major company in that field. I'm chairman. My son, who I put to work when he was 7 years old, is CEO of the company, and he's been trained all of his life in that field. But I got into that in an interesting way. It was obvious during World War II, when I was working with Douglas, that we were the aerospace, communication, electronic capital of the world. And people were discovering California. And many of them were from the East. And it was obvious that we would have growth after the world after we made the transition from one phase to the other. And a little over a year and a half before the war ended, I decided that I would go Air Force. I had been trained to fly. So I thought I should get away from the company end and look around in perspective. And thinking about where the industry was going, it was obvious that many, many new buildings, new facilities would be required, because what we had were a bunch of old dogs for the most part. I wanted to get into a different element so I could become involved. I'd been in many of the outside manufacturing facilities. And as I say, new ideas were there and new concepts and otherwise. So when I got out of the service, I did get into combat. I was doing a lot of similar things, and I was doing some flying and instructing in Arizona. We had the Chinese that we were training and some other specialized things. And so I thought, okay, I am going to be in the facilities business for this new industry that is developing, and there's a lot of opportunity, and there's different ways to design things. So I thought about that intensely in the Air Force, and when I got out, I got into the real estate business to get a feel of it and an understanding and acquaintance. I liquidated assets for some of the banks that had their issues. But in the meantime, I was working on new design ideas and new facilities. And I would take to the facilities department of the aircraft industry designs on a site that was available, buildings that I thought would fit them, and I had met many of them. And I said, help me with what your design ideas are, coupled with many changes that we made. And by helping in the liquidation of assets for some of the banks and others, established sources of financing. I think when I got out of the Air Force, I had $165 a car and a child. So there's no such thing, there's an old joke that's called, there's no such thing as being a little pregnant. Now, the people in the industry had these drawings, they had made their input in them, they thought of these plans and designs now as theirs, which was the basic game plan to get the intelligence but get the participation. And they were designed towards what I thought were their needs. And so they would say, okay, give us a rental quote or a price quote. And I would check with my financial world and in turn be able to structure some financing. At that time, everybody was anxious to build and lease to them or build and sell to them the building that they had participated in the design of it. So I then used a construction company which I subsequently acquired, and we developed a team. And then a big issue, I had been able to scrape some funds together to buy a parcel of property with a down payment, but someone paid cash for it, a beautiful 60-acre parcel near Northrop. So I said, well, I should talk to the man who bought it. I talked to him. He just planned to subdivide it and sell it. We structured some new ideas, sold him on the idea of participation and managing the operation and also being the broker with the participation and the contractor. And that was a more active start. And that came along just before the Korean War, which precipitated a lot of things. And so from that it grew in many directions over many years. But that's only part of it. A major part in my book is participation, not only of my people and bringing them in and developing them and giving them more opportunity and giving them authority, and in turn having the total combination of intelligence mass that you could get from all of these people, and it grows itself. And in turn, community obligations. I've been involved as chairman of many things, but I'm going to leave it up to you to ask some questions now.
Well, I think actually this is, yeah, we'll get back to that. They are sort of jumping around, but what do you consider your most important achievements or accomplishments?
Motivating people, building people, and in turn letting them help build me. But you've got to participate in things. You've got to stand for things. So it's been fun in so many ways. I've had the occasion, as I say, to be asked to be chairman of commissions. And one of the commissions happened to be the Port Authority, Los Angeles Port Authority. It was having its problems. The former president had been found floating in the bay. There were some rather typical influences that seemed to exist around the port. Sam Yorty was our mayor at that time. Sam was a good friend, and we've done some other things together. And so Sam asked me, and I said, okay, Sam, I'll do it, but you've got to give me 100% support, which means I'm in charge. And I said, if you don't, then I'm out of here. He did. We communicated with each other. We brought in some very good people. We changed some things around, and as graciously as possible, and some had to be less gracious. And we got participation, a lot of help from a lot of people, and it became a real profit center. Or we get into other things. I was chairman to get the Olympic Games for our Southern California for our quincentennial year, our 500th. I'm sorry, for our 200th year anniversary of our country, and we didn't get it, but we did some very interesting things. We had quite a battle with the Russians, which you may or may not have read about on that. But out of that, we established the concept of no-cost Olympics, which meant, with the help of many in the communications industry, we changed the overall plan of the International Olympic Committee and how we structured television and otherwise. I did some things that Peter was able to carry on. In '84, I was asked to take '84, but you do it once, you don't want to do it again. They made a couple $100 million out of that concept. But that concept was a participation by a team, where we took all the parts, all the components apart, and put all the components back together again. Paul was on that team that we're talking about, Paul Zimmerman, Bill Nicholas from the Coliseum, a lot of other great people, and they brought together, they were all motivated, and they all worked together as a team, working without the vanity, with each other's intelligence to try to get something accomplished. So if you answer what's my biggest accomplishment, it's motivation. But it's got very fundamental things to it, and I would describe it to you as this. I hear two people talking and one says, I know it. That means he probably doesn't know a damn thing about it. But I like the Air Force routine. You're flying with a co-pilot. You're talking to a controller. The controller tells you what he wants you to do. The co-pilot repeats it to the pilot, exactly. The pilot repeats it back exactly to the co-pilot. Or if two people are having a conversation, you do something very similar so you really understand, because people only hear about 40% of what's said. So, motivation, mutual improvement, personal improvement.
You've answered many of these. Here's a sort of pointed one. What is your favorite book or author and why?
I don't know that I can answer that. There's many favorite books. Do you measure them because you like them so well, or do you measure them by importance? A book I didn't like at all, but I find so few people have read it, and I find that so few people comprehend it, and most people wouldn't believe it, and it happened. That was Mein Kampf. Here a man told the world what he was going to do. Everybody smiled. And we still live in that kind of a fantasy world where many people, many groups tell us what they're going to do. We smile and say, oh, it's going to go away. It's going to go away. This is nonsense.
Did you read
when I was in high school.
So when it was current.
Yeah. Well, it's still current.
Well, I meant when it was recently published.
Well, you'd published it sometime before, but I tried to understand it. I tried to read it. I was shown a picture when I was about 7 years old. The brothers of my mother out of Nome were on a fishing trip, and the storm came up. This was in the Bering Sea. Storm came up, and they ended up, had to go to Russia. And while there was Russia, there was an execution, and they were able to get a photograph of it and bring it home. And it was an execution of a white Russian. And I could recall asking at that time, and it's just as vivid today as it was then. This was the execution of a white Russian by the communists. And who won the war against the Tsar? The white Russians were the military. They won the war, and then they were subsequently executed. I've got to tell you something. So I remember that very, very well, and I still remember that very, very well. You always want to be sure who your partner is.
All right, so you mentioned Mein Kampf. What about in a positive? Oops, go ahead. In a positive vein, in terms of literature. Any? What else have you enjoyed reading?
Well, I've got a library there. I have to walk in.
We don't need a dead horse here.
I'd have to walk in and show you so many books.
Yeah, all right.
And who do you like as authors? Well, there's just so many wonderful, wonderful authors. And I don't think how you really can say what is your favorite book. I think many of us could say the Bible. We're religious people. Many of us could say it's explanations of it. Many of us could say it's books about our Constitution. And there's a lot of just crazy funny books. I cannot say what is my favorite book.
Who were your heroes when you were growing up?
Well, my brother, but we fought a lot. That I got bigger than he was. I don't really know how to answer that. I was too busy trying to learn and saying so many people I respected, but to make them into, quote, a hero, not able to do that. But in later years, certainly, I was.
You just sort of answered not no, we've got that. And what do you hope to be remembered for?
I guess you have to say what I've done, or what I've tried to do. I don't know. Everybody's going to have different memories in different ways. I think that motivation with young people and others, and trying to help others, leadership, trying to face reality, and it could go in many ways. It could go in business. It can go into the fact if you have strong beliefs, you should try to
Why don't we stop just for a second? Where are we at?
Yeah, the clock, I guess the clouds are lower.
you know, you should try to put those strong beliefs in force and effect. Uh, I think we've had many great leaders of our country, and I think we've had some that aren't so great. I think that one of our great leaders was General Douglas MacArthur, in all of the things that he's done and in his history, which certainly is magnificent. I think that to specifically idolize, that becomes a very religious affair. And I've had the occasion to meet many wonderful people, many highly identifiable people that have done outstanding things in outstanding areas, and they've all contributed. So I don't mean to in any way downplay that. And I look at things in a different way. I've had the occasion to meet and get acquainted with a number of important people in the world, including presidents. And under our system, and I don't mean to be negative when I say this, but our president is an employee of our country. And we've had some good employees and we've had pretty awful employees. But that's, that's characteristic. And he's doing a job. And you respect the position tremendously. But I don't think you can necessarily, it's a highly respectful position, highly respectful job. But the machinery is there, it's there. Should you idolize the president? I don't think so. I think he is like all of us who are trying to do truly a good job. And so perhaps I look at it differently. I respect.
I've got a couple.
Oh,
Pick a
okay.
couple out of here.
Okay. Did you get all these?
I mean, he's addressed them.
Yeah. Where's that other? I just want to make sure we.
Right.
I
But
want to.
these are the optional. There's the replotted.
I just. Okay.
Okay. What has been your greatest disappointment or frustration?
That is a complicated question. Well, I'll give it to you. If you get something for nothing, it's worth nothing. My greatest disappointment is our drifting away from a wonderful, starting, hardworking educational system into something that takes away the motivation or doesn't build the motivation that so many children, and particularly the young people who may not have the means, even though the opportunity is there, they're downplaying the absolute essential of being in a world, a free world of wonderful competition, whereby your mutual competition, you improve life for everyone. And we all have competition. You want to be the best photographer, you want to be the best this, you want to be, or be close to the best, where you satisfy yourself as to the job you're doing. And I'm disappointed by a lot of what our schools turn out, and then pass the buck to somebody else, so that it's this or that or the other thing. Now, I've had a private project in many ways, and we do have a foundation that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm getting feedback. I'm not sure why. All of a sudden. Why don't you just move that plate away a little bit?
Okay, that's a good idea.
I'm not sure what that
Okay.
was.
Are you okay now? You better?
Yeah.
Okay.
When did it start?
Just right at the end. So maybe
You started to talk about your foundation.
It could be the resonance.
Are you done with your coffee?
Oh, it's okay. I've been in something involved in something for many years, since the mid-50s, and it's called sailboat racing. An ultra-competitive, a very physical, a very technical sport. You can get into wonderful dreams of how smooth the water is and how delightful it is, and then you can have a horror story. And yes, I've been in hurricanes and I've been in horrible storms and been racing in them. And in turn, I've very fortunately over the years been assigned, they assign numbers in the sailing world, and my number is US 1 in ocean racing. With 5 boats over a period of time and racing across the oceans, close course racing, doing various other things. And with young people. And all of my crew have been amateurs. And yet you see the excellence of the rating with those amateurs who had some training, perhaps others, but the discipline and the training and the organization and the motivation in using the critical mass of their brain power along with yours in motivating these young people. And now they came in as amateurs, they went out as amateurs, but we had something else. They could only sail with me for 3 years unless they had a future program, a lifetime program in effect. If they didn't think enough of themselves to have their own career into the future, out of sailing, off the boat. And I take a look at those hundreds of crews and what they've done in their life and the letters that I have for them. I'm writing a book in connection with motivation, and it's a wonderfully thrilling thing. And then comes the case of leadership. You have to respect, if we were sailing, we sailed up to 26 at times in close course racing in 80-foot boats. Normally, if we were sailing across the ocean, we'd have 17. And you're out in a horrible storm, hurricane, really horrible, some others. And you have leadership, and you have teamwork, and you have the integration and the self-confidence in the leadership and the organization that everybody does their job. And we even laugh. Now, that is, of course, helping myself. I have to be calm, I have to be focused, I have to speak slowly. And it's, in some ways, it makes it sound crazy, but it's fun. But it's fun watching the team work together in mutual self-interest and still being competitors. So I look at that as teaching leadership. I look at that as teaching mutual respect, and I look at that as training a group of young men and working with them that can go very far in their life if they want to keep the spirit going. And that, to me, is a great achievement. And it's much like that in business. But now let me give you a bit of something. Living at Newport Beach, one of my daughters came home from school. And her professor was telling her, she was about to graduate from high school, and her professor was telling her how terrible much of the world was, that with all the poor people, the churches should take their gold off the wall and sell their things and give it to the poor people so they could eat. And ended up in saying to my daughter, well, your father has a maxi boat and has that money in the maxi boat. Why didn't he give it to the poor? And I said to my daughter, I said, you go back and tell him he spelled it wrong. It's not a maxi boat, it's a Marxi boat. It's a redistribution of the wealth that gave people jobs and opportunities. So those little things, and hoping that you've made a tiny difference.
was going to say, yeah. If you had your life to live over again, what would you do differently?
Or would you do nothing differently?
Oh, I don't think you could ever say that because we have new technology. We do have new approaches to things, but I wouldn't change philosophically. I think that this is a God-given country of opportunity. I think that you can do so much, and if I could figure out a way to stop people from bitching, I'd do that.
And what would your friends or family be surprised to learn about you?
I think I've been fairly open.
I like that.
I think there was one. No, but there was one back here. When you were this one?
Oh, that's good.
When you were a child, what did you imagine your adult life would be, and how close did you come?
I don't think you could possibly imagine what your adult life would be.
So you didn't think about that?
I was too busy concentrating on today, but making plans for the future. But obviously, you have to have a structure to be able to have the leisure to plan something definitively, because there are many changes in life. You have many things to contend with that you didn't anticipate. But you can't walk down the street without seeing opportunity either. So that question is incomprehensible to me. I don't know how one could answer that. I think, do I know what's going to happen tomorrow? No, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so lots of interesting things may very well have happened. But you try to make a lot of things happen too. You don't sit around saying, what's going to go along? As you and I found out, time can be very demanding, and you can take a project on that can almost consume you if you're not careful. That's what I've done in trying to write this book that I'm writing about of these various subjects. And it goes into the fact that we are so blessed in our country because we are a nation of immigrants. All of us. And our families integrated from elsewhere. We are a nation that tries to be considerate of all of the other nations because we have families that have come from all those nations. And effectively, we've been the babysitter for of the world since World War II because of that very factor. So many people have learned they don't have to do anything. Well, we should be proud for what we've done. We're not always right, but we're proud for trying to help, quote, the rest of the world. I think that is a motivational factor that we should always keep, but we should always remember our roots. And we should become involved. And we should become involved on a positive basis, not a negative basis. I happen to be a very strong Republican. Some of my best friends are very strong Democrats. Thank God we only have really two parties. And we're not, obviously, we have different beliefs, but would we be terrible if we only had one belief? So, yeah, I've been involved, very much involved since, and various activities of our great party, and other people have been involved in activities of their great party. Not that I necessarily agree with them, but that's the story of life. So openness of discussion is the key.
Anything else about childhood or Alaska? Anything else? I think we're almost.
Actually,
I think we're winding down.
We did the Alaska. That was great.
No,
Yeah.
this is
I
good.
think. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Is there anything else you'd like to say to your kids or anyone, or how would you? Any other thing you'd like to pass on? Or?
A lot of things. I think I would answer this. No challenge is too great, because at the worst you could lose, and every loss is an education. Your successes come from your come from your losses. If we're trying anything scientifically or technically, you have to take it step by step by step. But every step can be an emotional loss. And you also have to make up your mind. Many people think that, oh, doing this is too big for them. They don't try, how do they know? How do they know? So it's in the satisfaction of trying, of thinking, so much could be done. But we should be blessed, because did you ever stop to think? We never have the answers. You do not have the answers because there's going to be a new, improved answer tomorrow. And when people say, I know, it shuts off conversation, they close their mind, and they fail to recognize that that new answer is coming along. And the designer of our system has done a never-ending job.
That's great.
Okay?
That's great.